I'm going to cut the normal intro tonight. Welcome everybody to our daily gun show. Come to you live every weeknight at midnight Eastern, and we talk about guns, usually for about an hour. Each night we talk about a different, or we have a different focus, a different subject. And on Mondays, it's 2A motivation and behind the scenes. Whenever possible, I try to have people on to have an interview. And I was just talking to Jake, and as people might know, if you've never watched the show before, I try to do this interview to give people, especially Second Amendment activists, an opportunity to chat about why they do what they do and how they do what they do. So I'm about to introduce Jake from Walk the Talk America. I'm going to take the lead from a podcaster I liked called James Kalita. He would just start the interview off and let the person go for like however long they talked. And I really like that. It just got like a kind of a off the top of somebody's head, you know, just whatever was on their mind. It was a great interview style, but I don't want to leave you hanging. So I'll introduce Jake here and then give you, some time to chat about briefly, because I think everybody that's listening knows what you've been up to and what you do. But for people that are brand new, maybe take just a couple of 10 minutes to let us know what you do. And then I'm going to ask you the big question of why you're doing what you're doing. So thanks for joining us. And Jake from Walk Talk America.
Yeah, I appreciate the platform. For anybody who's curious, the last name is pronounced Wiskerchen. And Patron in the Dark, I agree. I'm exhausted. He says, helping kid do history homework. And I'm looking at myself in my own video feedback. I'm like, man, I got bags under my eyes. I just finished 8 days in Florida. I shouldn't look this tired, but it is, nighttime. So thanks for the opportunity.
Appreciate you coming on at 9 for us in this part of the country, but it's midnight Eastern. I do that honestly because I normally start the show off with the radio soundbite from Red Dawn, where they say it's midnight. So I just started doing it at midnight, and now I kind of like it because I don't have to fight with anybody for the time slot. If it goes long, it can go long, but it is an ask to get people to show up for the show. So even though you're in the 9 o'clock time zone, I do appreciate you staying up for it.
Here we are in Radio Free America. The chair is against the wall.
Exactly.
So I actually am a night owl, so I don't mind this one bit, and I appreciate it. So Jake Wiskerchen, Walk the Talk America, and I own and operate an outpatient counseling facility here in Northern Nevada called Zephyr Wellness. I was born and raised in Northern Nevada. I'm a 5th generation Nevadan. I've lived a couple of different places, but this is home. And I'm a marriage and family therapist by license and by trade. And so I wear a bunch of different hats, and we can talk about those things. But my affiliation with Walk the Talk is the very brief short story is in 2019, I happened to be texting a friend whose mom owns a local range and retail store here called Reno Guns and Range. And it's the preeminent range and retail store in town. And his name's Jordan, and Jordan and I go back many, many years to college. We were in undergrad together in the fraternity, and he manages the store. And so for years we've been talking about this like guns counseling thing. How do we make it work together? We had no idea. And one day he texted me and says, have you heard of Walk the Talk America? I said, no. So I looked up the organization, found Mike. And I've had a podcast called Noggin Notes that deals with mental health exclusively, which is broad and far ranging. But I was like, man, that's perfect. I'm going to have this dude on my show. And so I did. And then we became best friends. And inside of 3 months, I was in the organization writing content for trainings. And if you don't know what Walk the Talk does, we're trying to bridge the gap between firearms ownership and mental health care so that we prevent people from taking their own lives with guns, by suicide. So that's the crux of it. And then it's rippled out into much more than that. So we're training practitioners like myself to be more competent and aware when we encounter firearms owners, including veterans and active duty military, law enforcement, and so forth. And so we don't scare them away with our ignorance. And then the flip side of that coin is to demystify what counseling is and invite people in to get it and try to strip away some of the mythology behind it, but also some of the misinformation about what laws are, potentially prohibiting your experience in getting mental health care. So that's me in a nutshell. Thanks for having me. Great podcast. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Just kidding. It's not where it ends.
So it's awesome. Appreciate that. And thanks for being brief. Like I said, I'm sure most people know who you are. And if you don't, then I usually try to put some links below, not just to the things that we're going to talk about today or that you're working with or the projects you're involved with, but is there a podcast that you've done before that you consider the one that's like your go-to? Or did you and Mike ever do like a specific one just as an intro videos or something like that? Is there something like that?
That's tough. That's actually something we kick around with our marketing guy, Kevin, quite frequently. So I've been, it's weird to say I'm a podcaster, but I guess I should because I've been doing it for like 5 years now. And then on top of Noggin Notes, we do a Walk the Talk podcast called Guns and Mental Health. And we interview people and we talk about pretty deep, powerful stories that people bring in, not just related to suicide, but, cannabis use. If they're a firearms owner and they use cannabis to alleviate, PTSD symptoms or anxiety or whatever, we talk about different treatments. We talk about defensive shooting. We had Michael Waller on, and he's incredible. Talking about how he went through that. And so having this has brought me into a realm where, and I'm very active on Twitter now too. And I've met a lot of really cool people from across the country and the world actually. And I've been on different shows and everyone's a little different. We talk about slightly different subjects or totally different subjects altogether. But I think honestly that the one I did most recently was on somebody else's show. And if I could point them to that, there's two of them. One is a gal named Stephanie Wynn, Winn. She goes by Some Therapist on Twitter. And the whole thing is you must be some kind of therapist. And that's her gig. And that's the podcast. So she's got a great podcast. She's a marriage and family therapist up in Oregon. And I went on there to explain this whole guns and mental health thing. She's, by her own self-disclosure, a former raging leftist liberal who's seen the light and come to the center, so to speak, and is now curious about all sorts of subjects. And one of which is how do guns and mental health coexist in the same environment? And I said, well, very simply, they do, and we have to acknowledge that. And so I think I did a pretty good job explaining everything to her. And then on another show called Disaffected, which is hosted by a guy named Joshua Slocum. That's a very, very, very good show. If you're interested in mental health stuff and especially personality disorders, Josh is not a clinician. And I've always told people that I listen very, very closely with a highly critical ear to non-clinical people talking about clinical matters. But Josh is so good at what he does, talking about personality disorders and specifically the cluster B type, which is our, narcissism, borderline, histrionic, and antisocial, or, what most people call sociopaths or psychopaths, that I just became totally hooked. And I shot him off an email and said, I appreciate what you do. And I probably couldn't do it myself as well as you do. And I've been on his show a few times, but we just did one where he interviewed me about the firearms thing. And he was somewhat unfamiliar, has become more familiar again, another, self-identified, highly leftist most of his life, and has come to the center and is now, he says, I didn't think guns were a thing. I thought they should all go away. And, now I find myself completely advocating for the Second Amendment because it is the thing that defends all our rights. So those two shows that were just done in the last half month or so, I think I would point people to. Outside of that, professionally, I talk a lot about emotional functioning, and I think emotional functioning forms the foundation of how we interact with our world, with our with all our interactions with people, our relationships. And if you want to learn about that, go to the Zephyr Wellness website and watch the emotional functioning videos that I've done. We have a YouTube channel. Zephyr has a YouTube channel with one guy on it. The guy's me, but like we have a YouTube channel. And so I try to put out content so people can understand how they work, how their brains tick, how their minds function. And my whole goal, you let off by saying, we ask what the why is. Why do you do what you do? And I'm a big fan of that because one of my big influences in my life, and I'll mention him in a little bit, has always hammered the principle of intentionality, which is the spirit of acting with great purpose, knowing why you do what you do. And my why for this whole thing, why I'm in mental health, why I stepped out of the closet as a gun owning clinician, which is another thing we can talk about, is because I want to see the world better. I want to see a healthy, healed community. And I live in Nevada. It is Nevada for those of you on the East Coast. It's not Nevada. There's no H or W in the middle of the name. It's Nevada. But we're dead last in behavioral health care rankings for years and years and years. And I hate that. Like I said, I'm many generations into Nevada. now. And I don't want my kids growing up in the same crappy situation that I grew up in, where we're getting bullied on the playground and nobody does anything. Or I watch, couples in the aisle of the grocery store fighting, and, nobody does anything. And there's no services, there's no resources, there's no place to go. And we lack the political will and capital to do anything about it. I want to change that. And the way I want to change that is to put information out in the public so people can solve their own problems and stop coming through the door of my clinic. And it sounds a little counterintuitive as a small business owner to be like, no, I want to work myself out of a job. I do, though. I'd literally be completely happy working any other job to pay my bills if it meant that I was working in a functional, healthy community. So that's why I want people to learn about their emotions. I want people to learn about these tips and techniques that I went to graduate school for. I want to just push this out. It's not some proprietary parlor trick where I just want to sit in the corner rubbing my hands and twirling my mustache as people stay on my calendar. Like that's not appropriate. So I want as much, I want more podcasts. I want as much information out so people can digest it and go, that guy makes a lot of sense. Maybe I'll find out more about this. And you help heal yourself, rectify your marriages, parent better, go to work a happy, cheerful soul, be productive, that kind of thing. That's my why. And I don't know how we measure that. I know that we're probably failing currently, but I'm not going to stop trying. In fact, it makes me angrier and it makes me try harder.
Well, that's one of the, I'm making some notes here just so I don't like to interrupt people. I would interrupt people, and I will interrupt you in the future. But in this first conversations with people, I try to let you just
please interrupt me. I tend to get on rants and soapboxes, and I need
I think that's what I kind of want to do here, though, is give people a chance to actually talk, because most of the time we end up having conversations where we do interrupt each other. But that kind of is what I was just going to say. There is there an example that we can look at for a healthier culture or society, or was there in the past, or is there something to look at as an example, or is it just theoretical, hypothetical?
To quantify that, like to actually put measurement to it, I think that's a disservice to what's going on presently. I'm a big fan of Jordan Peterson, and I heard him say one time in an interview when somebody asked him, does he regret something or other? He said, he paused for a very long time, and he said, no, I'm not going to betray my former self. And I don't think we do ourselves any justice in today's world to look backward and say, oh, it'd be so nice if we could just be in the fill in the blank time period, because there's always exchanges. What are you giving up to get back what you wistfully long for? So I think we have to make do with what we have now. But what I will say is that we can pretty much ascertain with a high degree of certainty that we are going way too fast and consuming far too much content broadly, and it doesn't matter what kind, than we're developed to do. We have not evolved as a species to consume and operate as fast as we do. And then you build in all the social pressures of performance and accumulation and comparison and all that stuff, and it just makes things worse for us mentally, spiritually, psychologically. And I do mean spiritually, because when we start to focus our attention on things that are fleeting, we tend to lose focus on things that are everlasting. And I don't care how you define that. I happen to follow Jesus. I'm a Christian, but it doesn't matter where you get your spiritual anchoring, such that you have one somewhere, because that's where you return when the storms blow and the things start going sideways. You go, what's my foundation? Where am I anchored? And largely we've lost that because we've just become super distracted. And that's, we can pin it on social media. We can pin it on instant gratification culture, consisting of Google search results turned very quickly. Don't have to go to the library anymore, all the way up to, Amazon drone delivery service or whatever. But it dates back to the microwave or the TV in the 1950s, or subscription TV where you don't even have to watch commercials anymore. So there's lots of contributing factors to this, and I see it all accelerating. There's a really good TED Talk by a gal named Catherine Bouskill, Bouskill. She's a cultural anthropologist, but she studies modern culture. Most people think of anthropology as history, digging up bones and stuff, but she studies modern cultural anthropology, and she has a great TED Talk talking about how we're just not meant to keep up with today's pace. Everything's way too fast. So if I were to say, how do we get healthy? What do we compare? I think all we got to do is just slow down and return to gratitude. I think a lot of us become just, and I'm guilty of it too, we just become entitled and petulant and frustrated when we don't get things customized to our liking immediately. And it's built into names of things. I mean, you think of like the iPhone, like me, right? My space, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, like everything's like you, specific, precise, customized, deliverable, centered on you, and immediately. And so it's so heavily what Carl Jung, who's a big name in our field, would call an introject, which is just an unquestioned belief or assumption that's been programmed into you. We're so heavily introjected with this that we don't even bother to stop and question it. And then when we do, it's like all the chaos stops spinning and everything kind of makes a little more sense. But almost immediately, as soon as we do that, we're jerked out of it by some other thing clamoring for our attention. You know, the phone dings or the roast is done in the oven or whatever. And it's like, whoop, out of that moment, on to the next thing. And it's like, go, 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 go. So I think if we just try to push pause, make our circles a little smaller, bring back into family and community in a tighter circle, I think that's super important. Well, I mean, and while I'm on it, while I'm ranting and you're allowing me to rant, I might as well say that in the emotional functioning component of things, if you watch my videos, I talk a lot about shame and guilt and how they're designed in our brains to respond appropriately to the environment when we let somebody down. That's shame. Excuse me. We fail to meet somebody's expectations. So we feel shame. Guilt says, go make it right. Well, that works really well because historically over the last 40,000 years or whatever that humans have been walking the earth in their current form, we needed to live in tribes. We needed the tribe because we have some certain resources and everybody else in the tribe has different resources. And we all pool our resources to make sure that we're moving forward, weathering predator attacks and environmental change and all that sort of stuff, so we survive. And now in the last 12 to 15 years, very, very recently, the tribe, quote unquote, I'll put that in air quotes for people who aren't watching the video, the tribe has expanded to what we would think of as a tribe roaming the Serengeti in 20,000 BC to everybody in the world. And that's been compelled upon us by our social media platforms and even some of our communities that have nothing to do with social media, like neighborhood apps and PTOs and that kind of thing, where it's like you can have an opinion, but if somebody you don't even know or care about or didn't even know existed until you formed the opinion pushes back and says, I don't like that, I'm offended by that, how dare you, whatever, all of a sudden our brain, our neurological limbic reflex says, uh-oh, you offended a member of the tribe, go make it right. The problem is that person's not even in your tribe. They probably don't even care about you. They're just anxiety riddled, or they've got their own issues, or they just don't like your face. And if you put enough of that in front of a person, say thousands on a social media platform, or millions, even if you got like lots of followers and you get lots of interactions, that can cripple a person because they no longer are responsive to the people who matter in their world. They've made the mental mistake of thinking that the tribe is everybody and you're never going to please everybody. But behind it all is like, oh my God, if I don't make everybody happy, I'm going to get kicked out of the tribe. And if I get kicked out of the tribe, I'll die because I don't have enough resources to live on my own. So that's a big problem. We need to acknowledge the shame, guilt response that we feel when somebody's like, I don't like your opinion. We have to consider the source of that and say to ourselves, do I care about this? And if I don't care, am I willing to withstand the blowback? And that just boils down to good boundaries. If I set good boundaries and I have good limits, I don't have to listen to everybody's opinion, because the people around me, as the Bible would say, that the trusted counsel of advisors is the one who matters. That's my family, that's my neighbors, that's my best friends, that's the people at work. And that's pretty much where it stops. You can have extended friends and associates and colleagues and so forth, but really you start losing track of who's important when you're starting to chase limbic emotional responses to things that were never supposed to be there in the first place. And like Catherine Buskill says, we just haven't evolved to absorb that much feedback, that much information.
So that's actually that's a lot of good stuff. And I put some notes in there, and I don't really, I'm trying to fight the urge to pursue the tangents or what could be tangents there. Cause I do want, because we're right at the 20-minute mark, and that gives us a good spot to just ask the open-ended why question. So,
go wherever
so
you want, man. Like I don't really pull punches or hide things or like like whatever you're curious about.
I hear you. No, I'm just trying to make the presentation, like I say, consistent, so that people get the opportunity to hear the how, the why, and the how from a group of people. But like I say, we'll have other conversations in the future, and I'll keep these notes. Just for example, I was just thinking there that when you said that everything's going so fast, that sounds very much like I bet you people would have said back in the days of cars, and maybe when cars went from Model Ts to, you know, the things that could go 100 miles an hour, and you know, maybe now even when, you know, there's other technologies, I'm sure that people have said, oh wow, we're going too fast. Maybe when we could start going in mechanical boats or something, maybe even riding horses. I'm sure somebody was walking and going, I don't know why these people have to ride around on these horses all the time. But
where is the limit, right?
But without getting into those kind of tangents in this conversation, and so to hear your origin story, so to speak. You came in it from the medical field, and for people, I'm trying to really assume that I'm depending on the assumption that people know about Walk the Talk America, Mike, and your relationship with him, and how you came to it, and you kind of described there literally how you became aware of it, and then your involvement with Walk the Talk America. But that's one of many things you've been involved with, and one of your many projects. So the question is, I try to make it open-ended. What's the why behind it?
I'm angry, in like a Bruce Banner sort of way. I mentioned earlier, I teach emotional functioning as a very large part of what I do, a portion of what I do. And anger is one of our 10 core emotions. And the purpose of anger, through the research that I've studied, is that it's supposed to motivate us to go make change. If we act appropriately out of our anger, there should be a targeted effort in some direction. And the analogy I always use is like, if I'm pissed off every day I come into work, I should probably go find a new job. That's a motivation to make change. If I'm angry at what Congress is doing, I could write a letter that might alleviate some of it. But really, if I'm serious about it, I have to make some sacrifice. I gotta run for Congress, right? I gotta unseat my congressman. So real functional anger requires great sacrifice, and that's not to be confused with activism, which I try to differentiate action from activism. Action takes like tons and tons of sacrifice. You can't be actionable from your keyboard. Typically, the people who are like, I lend my voice, it's like, okay, but what are you sacrificing? A couple hours in the evening that you would have spent doing something else. You know, like action is like, you set aside what you'd prefer to do because you want to go make a difference for the betterment of the whole. And yeah, there's some enlightened self-interest there because you are part of the whole. But ultimately, I'm angry. And the reason I'm angry is because I mentioned before, Nevada's last at everything you don't want to be last at, or near the bottom. You know, education funding. Yeah, I did. Yeah. Mental health care, healthcare broadly, access to everything. It's I love my state for all that it has to offer. But we can't recruit talent for business and industry. We can't retain the talent when we graduate from the colleges and universities. Like it's really not a good environment. And unless somebody comes in with a bunch of money from out of state and really drives policy, nothing really changes. And that you see a lot of that in Vegas. So for those of you who don't know the geography of Nevada, Vegas is Clark County. It's down at the point, down in the southern tip. Reno is the other population center up in the north, in the elbow of Nevada on the left-hand side, if you're looking at a map, near Lake Tahoe. And that's what governs Nevada. And forever it was Reno governed Nevada until, I don't know, the 1970s or so. Vegas started to have more of a foothold. And then it grew and grew and grew into the 90s and 2000s. And now Vegas pretty much runs all of Nevada. So the reason that is important is because, yeah, nice, good picture in Nevada. I'm up there in the elbow. The reason that's important is because people who come to a place from somewhere else usually do so for their own interests. They're not interested in necessarily changing the broader culture. They want to make their money, and that's casinos do that. Business and industry does that. If they happen to make some change along the way, that's cool, but that's not their primary goal. Me, having lived here and watched this stuff unfold, my primary goal is actually other-centered. It's not self-centered. It's the inversion. If I make some money along the way, then great. And that's probably not some advice I would give any business owner. But for example, I run Zephyr Wellness like a nonprofit. I try to put more money into the company than I take home. And it's a high degree of sacrifice. Well, one of those sacrifices I made was several years ago. I was angry at my licensing board because they weren't doing the right thing. They weren't following the law. They weren't following open meeting law. They were playing professional territorial games with licenses and all sorts of just bad stuff that gets way into the weeds and nobody cares about.
But local thing or state thing?
It was a state thing. So every state has occupational licensing boards that govern certain occupations. And ostensibly, the reason you have a licensing board is that the state gives its stamp of approval to minimum competence for that profession, whether it's contractors or doctors or nurses or lawyers or whatever. So my licensing board was doing lots and lots of wrong things and everybody knew it, but they were also kind of the mob. It was like, you don't take on the licensing board because they will disappear you. And there were lots of stories to go around to substantiate that. So everybody just kind of kept quiet. And I was like, no, this is bullshit. Like, I was raised through school to understand laws and bylaws very, very well. And I knew our state's laws and I studied them. And I was like, no, they can't keep doing this. Somebody's going to have to say something. And I was doing this as a lowly intern. And my supervisor was like, you're not going to speak until I'm done with you, because I don't want my license dragged through the mud with you. I said, that's fine. And then eventually I got fully licensed and I started filing letters of complaint with the licensing board. And then I found myself on the licensing board and I was like, well, that happened sooner than I thought. And I was like, well, here we go. Got some work to do. So I ended up helping rewrite most of our laws. And along the way, I promise this is going somewhere and it'll conclude, but along the way, I lost a ton of peer colleagues because here's the dynamic in our profession. Marriage and family therapists, licensed professional counselors, social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists who are MDs, medical doctors. They don't always play nice in the sandbox. And then there's the drug and alcohol counselors. There's this weird professional turf war that goes on saying that, I do this thing better than you do, and therefore we must fight about it. And it's very weird. And I truly believe that that's why mental health care has been pushed to aside for so long, is because we simply can't get on the same page to go lobby, for example, for higher reimbursement rates from insurance companies. So anyway, we fight. And there's two professions governed by the same licensing board: professional counselors and marriage and family therapists. I happen to be a marriage and family therapist. Professional counselors weren't given their full scope for a long time. They weren't allowed to treat couples and families, for example, in the state of Nevada. It's the only state to do such a thing. Why are we dead? Excuse me, I just swallowed a bug. I'm sitting outside. This might take a minute. There we go. We're out. The gnat is gone. So it's like, well, why are we dead last in things? It's like, probably because we don't allow people to practice to their full scope like they can in every other state. So I changed that, and it was to the great dissatisfaction of many of my peer marriage and family therapist colleagues, if you can believe such a thing, right? Like, you'd think that we all are into this together. We're all just healing people. We want people to be better. Nope. It's like, no, we do it different than they do it, and they shouldn't be doing it the way we do it. And it's like, harumph. So that incurred a lot of wrath. I lost a lot of peer colleagues. Well, I went through that crucible, and it was great and awful simultaneously. Sucked away 3 years of my life, neglected my family, barely held my business together. I have no idea how I did it. Grace of God, power not of my own. So fast forward from 2016 to 2019, I meet Mike Sedini, and I'm a concealed carry permit gun-owning clinician. And I have him on the podcast. And one of the things, I totally forgot about this until he told me about it like 2 months ago. I said, we could talk about all your organization and stuff, but we can't mention that I'm a gun owner. He's like, okay. He thought that was weird. It felt weird coming out of my mouth. And then later I realized this is such an important thing that if I'm experiencing what other gun owners experience and I'm one of the professionals, I can't half it. I can't straddle the line. So I was like, well, I probably lost all the peer colleagues I'm going to lose for my career doing that licensing board thing. I should probably just come out of the closet as a gun owning practitioner and lose the rest of them if they care. And what happened was exactly that. But also a whole bunch of other people came out of the woodwork and were kind of whispering like, oh man, I didn't know you were a gun owner. Me too. How do you do that? I'm like, how do I do what? Like, I'm honest with people. It's like, what do you mean? Like, how do it was so bizarre, but that's how we've been indoctrinated, is to don't talk about that thing or this thing, comply, bow, kiss the ring of all the professors and the gray-haired people that mentored us in the profession. And it's very weird because our profession is supposed to be about challenging things and pushing people out of their comfort zones and questioning our own understandings and beliefs and lifelong learning and non-judgmentalism. And it's like, oh my God, you're none of those things. You're very rigid and you're very myopic and you don't welcome people in, and you're very highly politically motivated. So I realized I had to take the step forward and be something that didn't exist. And lo and behold, here we are 3 years later in 2022, and I still survey the landscape. And the emails I get and the instant messages from or the direct messages on social media from Twitter, from Instagram, it's like, hey, I love what you do. I'm a social worker in such and such state, or I'm a licensed professional counselor in another, whatever state. I love what you do, but I can't do what you do because my boss will fire me or it won't be welcomed here. And I'm like, oh my God, you're part of the problem. Like we have to be bolder than that if we're really going to advocate. And if we want to stop people from losing their lives, and I don't necessarily just mean by gunshot or, end up in the actual physical grave, but like people lose their lives all the time through addiction, through broken marriages, through separation from their kids, because they are not willing to get it together because of the fear of judgment from people like me. They're like, dude, we gotta get it together. So the why is I want to move the needle on not only firearm suicide, negligence, all that stuff, but also the ripple effect into families and businesses and culture of organizations and professions like law enforcement, like military veterans, like plumbers and pipe fitters, attorneys, frontline medical doctors, physicians, EMTs, all the tough people of the world who have been told through either explicit or implicit verbiage and training, it's not okay to be weak. You're not allowed to cry. You can't ask for help because we're going to call you a wuss, or you might not get that promotion, or you're going to be deemed unfit for duty, or whatever it is. Like, that has to stop. It has to stop. And the only way it's going to stop is if people like me step forward and say, hey, I'm here for you. I'm a dude. I cry. I teach emotions. I'm 6'1", 200 pounds. I look like a linebacker, and I got bullied for 12 years of my life, and it wrecked me, and I probably ended up with a personality disorder out of it. But I got through it, and I can show you the way also. And I know there's more people out there who can do that if we're just courageous enough to face our own damn peer colleagues who are keeping us in the shadows. It's not okay. We talk about mental health stigma. It's like, where does it come from? It comes from us. We are the ones who stigmatize it. We're the ones who are teaching each other that it's not appropriate to be on social media. It's not appropriate to have a podcast. You gotta, be super quiet about what you do and don't bring it up at a party. Like, this is actually going on in graduate school. They actually teach us this stuff. It's crazy to me. It's like, well, why don't people come in for care? It's like, I don't know, because we treat them like they're lepers. Like, that's not cool, man. My dentist doesn't do that. He says hi to me. Our kids go to the same school. He doesn't ask me about my feelings. That would be a HIPAA violation. But he definitely says, hi, Jake, nice to see you, and shakes my hand. My orthopedist does that. My physical therapist, like my financial advisor, and I go golfing. Like, they all handle sensitive information. They're not weird about it. So why are psychotherapists weird about it? It's because we're trained to be weird. And I'm trying to change that because it matters to people. People are dying. Relationships are fracturing. Kids are getting bullied on the playground because some parent somewhere is like, nope, I'm not taking my kid to the therapist because he's going to like pick up the bat phone to the government and take my shit. Like, that's not what we do, most of us. And for the some of us who do, they should be pushed out of the profession. But I don't get to control that. I get to control me, and I get to control the message that I send. So my why is done out of anger, not just because I live in a state that's the worst at everything you don't want to be the worst at, but because I look around at my peer colleagues and they're just not moving. They're not recognizing the problem. They're not recognizing that, you know, out of one side of their mouth, they're saying guns are stupid and firearm violence is bad and end gun violence by banning AR-15s. And at the other side of their mouth, they're going, suicide prevention is my thing. It's like, you do realize that almost 2/3 of gun deaths are suicides, right? It's like, nope, doesn't compute. They don't want to hear it. So I'm trying to rattle cages and maybe change some minds and win some hearts. Hopefully it works. So far it's working. The gun community loves it. That's been the blessing. I've been a firearms owner my whole life, but I was never part of the community until I met up with Mike and Rob Pincus and those guys. And I went to GRPC in 2019 and then shot in 2020. And the community absolutely welcomed me with open arms. No suspicion whatsoever. In fact, it was, if anything, it was like they kind of like took 2 steps forward, 1 step back, kind of reached out, touched me to make sure I was real. And then it was like, man, this is so cool. This is so refreshing. The clinical community, little chillier, but I don't care. I'll take the wins where I can get them, and if that gets people into treatment, then awesome.
Right on. Well, it's a bunch of cool stuff. And for people that don't know the whole deal, you know, I talked to Jake about doing the conversation. Oh, I don't know, a couple while ago. We scheduled it for today. And then maybe a half an hour ago or an hour ago, I tried to attempt to say, I'm going to ask you 2 big questions, the why and the how. So he didn't have a lot of time to prepare for that answer. And that was awesome. So I really appreciate how you were able to explain, you know, the facets of that. So my one question is going to be, would you have done Walk the Talk America if you wouldn't have been in the situation to do the board and, you know, bring that stuff to the board first? Like if you wouldn't have already burned those bridges, so to speak, or at least
I don't know,
gotten that catalyst, right?
I'm going to back up to the how real quick. The how is a little more precise than I shared. I know what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, and part of that is conversations like this, and another part of it is
the why, because we're about to talk.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you asked why and how, and I think that's legitimate, and I think the how deserves a.
Oh yeah, we'll spend the rest of the time talking about how. But go ahead.
Okay. Go ahead. So the how is what WTTA is doing with its training. So we go in and we train non-gun people or gun people, if you're there, what gun culture is. And it's very, very cool. And we have 2 free trainings that we've recorded and we posted on the website. We probably need to update them because the data have changed a little bit. But and we're a little better at it too. But it's hard to get me and Mike and Rob in the same room at the same time. But the 2 free trainings on the website, if you're friends with anybody in the healthcare community who wants to understand gun culture, I think we do a really good job of explaining a foundational understanding of it. So it's part 1 and part 2. They're free. Take them. You get a little certificate, it spits out at you. And if you're in the healthcare community, sometimes you can get continuing education credit for that. That's good for your license renewal. And then the flip side of the coin is I will go out and I'll teach counseling stuff and emotional functioning to firearms owners, up to and including, manufacturers, retailers, ranges. And one of the things I'm working on right now, I've got to conceptualize in my head. I was explaining this to Byron, the instructor, last night on an Instagram thing. I want to create a PowerPoint that's just sort of a drop in, 15 to 30 minutes that any firearms instructor who has watched my emotional functioning videos and knows what they're talking about can work into a intro to gun, CCW renewal class that covers the basics of mental functioning. not mental health. It's not about that. It's about what does your brain do and why does it do it, so that you can become more in charge of your decisions, your actions, your behaviors, and also your communication. Hopefully, if we improve communication, we'll improve relationships. But just 15 to 20 minutes from a firearms instructor talking about stuff that was previously taboo, I think will go a long way to helping the community. And so the idea is to get that into a presentation form that people can easily digest, consume, and then regurgitate to their audience. That's the how. The how is also I'm wearing a bracelet. It says WTTA.org/love. You go to the website, anywhere on the website, but this particular slug takes you to free and anonymous mental health screenings. Gun owners love anonymous. Everybody loves free. So free and anonymous mental health screenings. These are powered by Mental Health America. And it's a great way if you're just like, man, I've been edgy for like weeks. It seems, man, it just seems like weeks have been edgy. Dude, go to the website, take a screening, see where you are. If it feels like depression, take the depression screen. If it feels like anxiety, take the anxiety screen. Take them all. They're like 3 minutes a piece. It's super easy. And if the number that it spits out isn't something you like, well, maybe go seek professional care, or at least go talk to your local bartender or your neighbor, right? So that's the how. And along with the how is getting the message out through the form of flyers in firearms boxes, flyers on the counters at gun stores that lead to the link, that invite people passively into exploring what their brains are doing, what their minds are doing, how they're functioning. Take free and anonymous mental health screening. Listen to our podcast. Just know that you're not alone in the world. That's the how. Nobody else is having this conversation. Now they're starting to, which is awesome. I love that. But 3 years ago, this conversation literally didn't exist. We're still, I think we're still the only organization probably in the entire world that is doing mental health. I know there's organizations like Hold My Guns. It's like Hold My Guns in a period of crisis. That's fine. But there's no treatment aspect. There's no training aspect to that. And that's not to knock them. That's just to say we're pretty unique. And that's a pretty special thing. And we're a nonprofit. You know, I'm blessed enough to have my salary generated by my employees at work, so I can go and do things like this and not worry about taking hours off the calendar as a different kind of sacrifice. My sacrifice was already paid for, you know, when I opened my company and spent 5 years broke. But now I'm in a position to do this. So that's the how. And we want to be very precise about that. We want to be very diligent. So when we're flying across the country, giving these trainings to local, governmental health and human services agencies or retail stores or ranges or instructors, we can say, you know, just like Rob Pincus will say, if you want more about this, go to the Personal Defense Network videos and you can learn it, right? We can say, you want more about this, go to the Zephyr Wellness page or the Walk Talk America YouTube channel, and you can learn more about it. So that's the how. But getting back to your other question about, like, what am I, you know, how did I come into this and what are we doing? No, I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
I was asking if you would have done Walk the Talk America.
Oh, what about, yeah, that's right.
Feeling if you wouldn't have already burned some bridges on the way.
Yeah, that's hard to say. I don't know. I don't know. Timing matters. And at the time that I did the board thing, there were other things going on in my life, professionally, personally, that allowed me to do it. And I knew there'd be a benefit from it. It wasn't ego driven. I knew that. It was because I needed to make fundamental change. And part of it was like, I'm going to be working in this profession for the next 30 years and I can't operate under these conditions. So I have to go change them. So like I said, the enlightened self-interest. So if WTTA had graced my consciousness, and it didn't exist in 2016 or 2015, but if it had, I probably wouldn't have, because it wouldn't have made any sense. I think things had to unfold the way that they did. And here's the cool part. There's other things that I don't want to get into right now, but I see it unfolding with other professionals around the country on different topics that have to do specifically with our profession. And I don't want to bore everybody with that, but I'm watching other people do essentially what I've done with WTTA. And I'm supporting them the best that I can by saying, you have to be this voice right now. Believe me, no one else is doing it. I'm behind you, but I have to be behind you. I can't be beside you or in front of you because I've got this other thing going on. But trust me, I've been through this. I've walked through these fires, and I'll tell you how to avoid certain potholes the best that I can. And that's pretty cool. So it's not necessarily that I'm I'm leveraging my own experience for another own experience of myself, but I can reach out and connect with different people in different areas, if that makes sense, to say, hey, I've seen kind of what you're going through. And
like in non-gun owning stuff, like
yep, non-gun owning stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Where they're having to walk in two different worlds that seemingly contradict, or they're just facing a holy hellfire of pushback.
That was one of my notes from before too, was as you were describing the situation with the board and then with Walk Talk America and bringing the aspect of the plight of gun owners, I guess, to the medical field. I was going to say, will that 2A fight unravel other facets in the medical community? So I don't know, like, I don't even know what that might be, but maybe let's say drunk driving. What if it turns out that nobody paid attention to, you know, there's some kind of a reason why drunk drivers won't seek help because, and this makes it, this peels back something where everybody goes, oh, wait a minute, if this is the case with gun owners, then this might be the case, you know, maybe we can be better in other places.
Yeah. There's so much stigma. I mentioned, try to figure out how to phrase this. So I mentioned all those other professionals earlier, the plumbers and pipe fitters, attorneys, firefighters, whatever. They're not gun owners all the time, but they don't come seek help for the same reasons, which is they don't want to be judged. So for us, it's a personal constitutional right. It's a civil right. It's a property right. It's also for them, it's the same stuff, because their right to pursue life, liberty, and happiness the way that they see fit may be threatened if they're deemed by their peer colleagues to be quote unquote crazy, or, oh, you're depressed, so therefore we can't have you fly in the plane, right? Stuff like that. Well, you might crash into a mountain. And that stuff's just not true. Data wise, we don't have data to substantiate that. It's all emotional based. I saw PNW, Pacific Northwest Woods, has he found that other professionals are anti-gun based on emotion or data? It's always emotion. There's no data to back this up. Any data that you see coming from Giffords or every town, the places that claim that they'll look at our research. Like, what if it's research? It's not your research. Like, that's the first thing. Secondly, their studies are flawed. They cherry pick their data. They cross-reference with places like Gun Violence Archive that we know inflates their numbers, and we know this because they tell us on the website. So Gun Violence Archive, for example, considers a mass shooting where there are 4 more people present, not 4 more people shot. And that's just disingenuous research. That's nothing that would ever pass muster in a peer-reviewed journal. But boy, it's out there, and boy, every freaking mass media article I know of cites it, from CNN to MSNBC to even Fox News sometimes. The Gun Violence Archive, it must be good, it's an archive. It's like, no, they fudge their data. And it's agenda driven. Even the universities that research this stuff, Duke, Johns Hopkins, their reports always land the way they want them to land. So no, there's no data to back this up. If you look at the raw data and the pie chart that I always share, homicides are 23,000 a year out of the 60,000 gun deaths that we have, and 48,000 of them are suicides. I'm making numbers up because I don't have it in front of me, but it's like 62% are it's right there. 62% are suicides. 30% are 38% are homicides, and of the homicides, 3% are mass shootings. And of all gun deaths, 0.3% are mass shootings. Like, there's no data to support banning AR-15s. I think it was wasn't USCC. NSSF has an article that suggests that 14% of the 0.3% of the mass shootings were done by rifle. It's like that's an infinitesimal number. We got 24 million rifle, almost 25 million rifles in this country. Assault style, whatever, AKs and ARs. You'd think we'd have like explosive amounts of violence with rifles. We don't, because guess what? Most of us use them appropriately, and they don't fall into the wrong hands. So it's all sensationalism. And again, not to thump my own chest, but if you watch the emotional functioning videos, you understand how the limbic system responds a certain way in the brain that overrides the logic system. Logic says, what do the data show us? Limbic says, oh my God, freak out. Somebody told me something scary. And so we act out of that emotion in our policy decisions, in our judgments, in our belief systems and whatnot. And that's not the way you want to make good legislation. You want to legislate out of emotion. You want to parent out of emotion. You don't want to make any decisions out of emotion. You want to make them out of logic. What you want to do is take the emotion, try to figure out what it's telling you, then make a logical decision. So yeah, all these other professions are afraid to come into counseling for the same reasons. And that's where you hear this like destigmatize mental health. And I'm not a big fan of using the word stigma, because the brain never registers the not or the don't or the D. It just registers the thing. So if I tell you, don't think of elephants, first thing that pops into your head is an elephant. So if I say think of tigers, well, you're going to focus on tigers, right? So what we want to do is, or at least what I would invite people to do is, instead of saying destigmatize, I would say treat it normally. If you're sick, you're sick. If you're sick in the brain, you're sick in the brain. If you're sick in the mind, you're sick in the mind. If you're sick in your arm because you broke it playing racquetball, treat it. And also treat it as though it's overcomable, because it is. Very, very rarely, very exceptionally, extraordinarily rarely is a mental illness permanent. People who believe mental illnesses are permanent have basically given up on treating it. That's my take. And I'll fight everybody on it.
They're unaware. What do we know about mental health? I mean, what we see in movies and TV, and it's the same as a revolver that can explode a car if it hits in the gas tank.
Right. Yeah. Use the 50 cal. It shoots through an engine block. Okay. I just got one of those laying around that I can carry with me. So yeah, that's enough to say about that, I guess, for right now.
Right on. So I was going to ask then, I've got a couple of questions in here, but I had my own question here that I thought was better for this next one, which was, no, not that one. Oh, so when we're talking about, I was going to say normalizing mental health awareness then.
Yeah, I think normalizing is fine. Here's the problem with normalizing, though. I don't want to make it like mental illness is normal. That's a huge problem right now, and it's afflicting our children in a big way.
Well, say that again. It is normal, or you don't want to suggest it?
I want it normal to be discussed. I don't want to normalize that everyone is mentally ill. There's a distinction to be made there.
Fostering the idea that everyone has mental illness, and just
from time to time. Yes, from time to time. And so there's a couple angles here. One is we have to define what a mental illness is. We have a book. It's a big book. It's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. Mental Disorders, it's the DSM, right? We just call it the DSM. It's currently on its 5th iteration. And that's like our Bible. That's the thing that we go to that tells us how to diagnose things and to describe them and what they are. What it doesn't tell us is how to treat them. We need the diagnoses to create codes that send off to insurance companies so they can reimburse us for care. We also need the book so that we have a common understanding and language among and between professionals. So if I tell another professional major depressive disorder, recurrent, moderate, they know what that means. Those are the two functions of that book. Now, it should be very, very hard to get diagnosed with a mental disorder because the criteria to meet are pretty challenging. However, that doesn't mean that you're not mentally disturbed or distressed or dysregulated and don't meet criteria. And that happens all the time. If I'm 44 years old, if I watch my dog get hit by a car, it doesn't matter if he's 10 and probably on his way out in the next year and a half anyway, that's going to suck. And I'm going to be rocked for a few days. I don't meet the criteria for mental disorder though. And I should not seek therapy for that. If it lasts for a long period of time, as indicated by the book, and the symptoms are such that they interfere with my daily functioning, and then I've leveled up to a mental disorder, and I probably need some professional care in the form of maybe some medication or some meditation or therapy or talk therapy, whatever, journaling, articles, whatever. But normal life circumstances are not supposed to result in hospitalization. They're not supposed to result in months of treatment, 1 hour a week with your counselor. And that's what's happened, unfortunately, with the popularization, and I will use that term, the popularization of mental health care, which I happen to think is probably a pretty good thing over the last, certainly last 2.5 years since 2020, but preceding that by a couple of years. So I'll call it 5 years. We've destigmatized, but the pendulum has swung away from don't talk about mental illness to it's popular to have a mental illness. And there's some social capital in that. When you say, oh, I'm struggling with my depression, you post it on Facebook and everybody's like, oh, you poor thing. Well, guess what you just earned? A bunch of adoration and affection and praise. And you're so strong and you're courageous for sharing your story. Yeah, I don't think that helps, because what it says to everybody else is this is a good way to get likes and clicks. And our kids watch that. And TikTok is full of that crap. TikTok is full of children who are creating a contagion effect among other children who don't have illnesses, who realize that they get millions of views if they say they have an illness, and then suddenly they have an illness.
So you're not even talking like, oh, I think I have something, but instead I know I'll get more views if I play the role of I have whatever.
Yeah, and it's not even that conscious, and it's not even about views. It's about so we do a lot of work in a rural school system here in Nevada, about 100 miles away from Reno, and these kids aren't Instagram celebrities. They're kids in a town of 2,500 people, but you still get the same level of attention from your peer colleagues in school if you're depressed or if you have personality or suddenly you decide you're a different identity, right?
It's the equivalent of standing up in the class and getting all the attention.
Mm-hmm.
They don't need the level of Instagram top level fame. They're just looking for the ability to be famous to their peer group.
Yeah, and what we have to ask is why is that happening? And my recurring theory that is yet to be bucked by any sort of evidence, either anecdotal or empirical, is they're not getting it at home where they should be getting it properly. So where do they go? They go to their friends. And it used to be, my parents are ignoring me, I'm going to go hang out with my friends and drink in the canyon or whatever. That's a different kind of danger and problematic. But now we've got people who are identifying differently, self-harming, ideating suicide because it gets them attention. And that's the type of pendulum swing I'm talking about. Instead of saying, no, you're not depressed, you're lonely, go get a friend, re-enroll in softball after school, you'll be fine. We coddle them and we go, oh, you poor thing. Let's get you to the psychiatrist and get you on some medication. ADHD is a really popular one because it's very nondescript and almost anything can be ADHD. But if you read the book, the DSM, and you read all the confounding variables and you read all the differential diagnoses, it should be almost impossible to diagnose somebody with ADHD in its pure form. It's almost always something else. It's a trauma effect. It's a bored kid who's really smart. It's bipolar disorder. It's something else. All of which are treatable, by the way. But when we've got my clinic being flooded with people who are they're significantly impacted to the point that their life skills are diminished. So they think they need care and they come in and we analyze it in, 15 minutes and go, hey, actually, what you just need to apologize to your mom and go make amends to your dad because you've been kind of a turd for the last couple of years and you're 14. That's probably going to be okay. And parents are like, really? And the kid's like, really? And you go, yeah, it really is that easy. It shocks them. They're like, well, we thought this was much more complicated. And it's like, no, get off the internet. Stop pursuing dark, deep rabbit holes. So I do want to normalize the conversation. I don't want to popularize illness. I'll go back to the top of the session, when we were talking about how I want to keep people out of my agency by dispensing information that's useful. I don't want these kids and these adults coming in with symptoms that they don't believe they can overcome. That's another narrative that we have to change too, is like, I was born this way. It's like, no, you weren't. You didn't come out of the womb angry. It doesn't even make sense. You trained yourself that way, maybe, but anytime we can train somebody, we train them differently to go a different direction. So this is supposed to be hope inspiring. And I don't want to sound like I'm condescending anybody who's struggling. You can struggle, but it may not rise to the level of, mental disorder per the book, billable to insurance. But boy, the people living it sure think they are. They think they're really, really suffering. And that's real. That's really hard for us to to differentiate when they come in and they're like, I have all these symptoms, click, 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 click. It's like, man, you're 12. How do you know all this? Like, I've been online a lot. Don't be online and you won't have those symptoms. They're all in competition with each other. So yeah, we want to normalize the conversation. We want to validate people, but we want to take personal accountability for how we interact with our environments.
Now that can be accomplished through basically awareness and education, right? Same way it sounds as though in the big picture, at least, and I'm an optimistic, I guess, but it sounds like that can be accomplished in the same way that CPR was accomplished and then eventually stop the bleed classes. Once teachers, for example, are aware and they add it to curriculum, then the next generation is just, I think of it as like a leg, like you twist your leg or you break your leg or you get a cut in your leg. It's all going to be, you twist your ankle, you break your leg, or you get a cut or something. Everyone knows that those are three different things, and nobody expects that kid to play softball the next day. Or if he does, they know he's going to hurt his leg more, right? And they're all going to go like, oh, he's sacrificing his leg for this. He can't do it. There's going to be all that. When it's mental, we all just don't have the words to describe the elements, right? And I don't think it's intentional. I think it's just that nobody has the words to describe all this stuff. Now that it's come into light, people will be able to say like, hey, I got to sit out. I don't feel good today. What do you mean? Does your leg hurt? No, my brain hurts. I'm sitting down today. Like, oh, okay. You want something for it? You want something to drink, or you want the tomorrow off too? Or, right. I don't know what I'm just using that as an example that once we understand that it's just like hurting our leg, right? Sometimes you cut your leg off. Sometimes it's going to heal right up. Sometimes you're going to have a limp, but it's just another organ. It's just another facet of us, right?
Yeah, you make a good point there about kind of, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like training everybody to be aware of that, right? And so we can kind of give a pass to people. The problem is it's not tangible, it's not visible. We can't look at it and go, oh, bleeding, cut. We just have to take somebody's word for it, and I think that puts a lot of people on their heels, especially with regard to like the workforce. Are you taking a mental health day again? Was the fourth one this week? It's like, well, yeah, you might need to pay attention to that.
Where they think they need it, and they just don't realize,
Well, and the fact that they're even bringing it up, you're like, you got your fourth mental health day this week. Maybe there's something bigger going on in your life. Maybe work shouldn't be your priority right now. And maybe as your boss, I shouldn't make work your priority right now if I care about you as a human being. So there's a whole corporate conversation we could have about corporate culture needs to change and all that stuff. But I think we also need to pay attention to making. I'll back up a second. When I was trained to be a counselor, I was told I had a very, very good supervisor. Her name's Gail, and Gail said, "Our job as therapists is not to make people better. It's not to make change. It's to create an environment where change is possible. So it's warm, it's welcoming, it's non-judgmental, and then if they choose to change, they can do so. But we're not responsible for the change." And I think that bosses would do well with that. I think teachers, administrators, certainly parents, they need to create an environment where honest, transparent conversation can be had without fear of reprisal. A lot of gun owners don't want to come into care because of fear of reprisal. They think they're going to have their property taken away or their rights, or they're going to get imprisoned in a hospital against their will. First of all, that's really, really, really extraordinarily fleetingly rare. Of the millions and millions and millions of visits across the country every year, only a handful end up in institutionalization against their will, and you don't know any of those people. Like, very, very rarely does that happen. If you happen to know somebody who is placed on a 72-hour involuntary psychiatric hold, you probably within yourself go, yep, they deserved it. And that's the first line that we go to anyway, is higher level of care. We don't go to taking your stuff. Like, it's not appropriate. And there's ethical prohibitions of that too. But I get the hesitation. So how do we fix that? You mentioned earlier something along the lines of like, I don't think it was intentional. And I agree with you. I don't think it was intentional, but it was definitely done by our people, because we had for years and years and years, we had in our heads that what we did was something special and magical and nobody else could possibly understand how we do it. And I think it was largely because we didn't have the intentionality.
You say our
why we did it.
The mental health
psychotherapy. Yeah. Mental health people. And so we hid in the shadows. And what that created was a marketplace void where the large corporate insta-therapy entities, as I call them now, Talkspace, Good Therapy, BetterHelp, we're going to do a whole show about how I hate that model, but nonetheless, it exists. And why does it exist?
Therapy or something?
Yeah. You go online, you do 30 minutes at a time, and they promise, it's like a concierge thing. You pay a monthly fee and you get certain levels of access based on, gold, silver, platinum, or whatever. It's what Michael Phelps advertises. And it's not good care. I won't say it's unethical, because bad therapy is not illegal. It's just not effective. And I don't care how many testimonies they trot out there. The baseline comparison is against something that wasn't good in the first place, which was the people doing it in the shadows. And so we created this void, this vacuum. And when pandemic hit, it was a crazy opportunity for people to seize on, to make a killing out of. We're facing tech startups, but of a healthcare variety now, and it's super dangerous. That the rubber band is going to snap back after all these millions of people who are in those care services realize they're just not getting any better, and they've been doing it for 12 or 14 months, and then they'll all come. Hopefully, they will come back to us. I don't know that they will, because they may distrust the entire profession at that point, kind of like we all distrust public health right now, because public health messaging has been awful for 2.5 years. But that's what happened, and so I can go out there and say, hey, I'm a cool dude. I've got these credentials, and I've been on a bunch of podcasts or whatever in the gun community. You can trust me. And maybe some people will listen, but I don't know that anybody's really interested in augmenting their utility belt, so to speak, with more knowledge about more things. You already mentioned CPR and, all that stuff. Like, do we need mental health first aid for everyone? And also, it's like, yeah, we really do. And it's not going to hurt anybody. But who's got the time? Who's got the bandwidth? Especially now when we're already stressed out, everybody's burned out, nobody even wants to work anymore. I'm like that some days. So where's our audience is the question. And how do we bring people to the table to say, look, you too can help another fellow human being by learning the bare minimum. And for me, the bare minimum is emotional functioning. I keep going back to that, and I'll beat that drum forever until something else changes my mind, which, I've changed my mind. Like, I'm not going to die on that hill, but for right now, it's working really well. If you learn emotional functioning super well, please don't just hoard the information. Share it with people. Start labeling things accurately. Like, well, you seem sad right now. Not upset. Upset is generic and vague and subjective. Sad is very precise. So if you say, wow, you're sad right now, people usually, it drains the limbic system. They come forward and go, yeah, thank you. You're right. Man, I feel better all of a sudden because you validated my sadness. That's all it takes. But you can't do that if you don't know it. And like you said earlier, we don't have this in any curriculum. Nobody's teaching this. We got social emotional learning kind of loosely doing it, but I don't know, 70 or 80% of that's pretty trashy too. So that's how you do it. All the other stuff is, I think it's just packaged up so people can make money off of it. They've tried out to K-12 curriculums. They're like, mental health first aid, teach all the teachers. Teachers are like, I'm teaching enough as it is. My slate's full with reading, writing, arithmetic. I don't need anything else. But yet they can't avoid it because all the kids are getting sicker. And so who does it fall to?
Is there something like a first aid course for mental health awareness?
There is literally a thing called mental health first aid. Yeah. And it's quite useful, but it's like anything. If you don't practice it, you're going to get rusty, and it's cool for a week and then you forget it. And
I figure it's like, I was an EMT. I never did anything. Mm-hmm. I just went to school and I got nationally registered, and then I talked to too many EMTs and did too many ride-alongs, and I was like, okay, I'm going to not to be an EMT. So I never did it, but I did do a lot of ride-alongs and stuff. And what was I going to say? I think it's I was going to say, is it something that
you got to practice your splints and tourniquets? Like,
well, I was going to say, it's like I never seen a baby get born. I never had to do nothing like that, but I read about it a couple of times. So if I had to, I would, if there was nobody else there, I would attempt it. But
I think
I also
that's
know
totally
all the bad things. So I was just wondering if there's something like that, just so you know that it's there.
Yeah, I think that's totally appropriate analogy, and that's kind of what we're trying to do at WTTA with our training courses. Is if I get hired, and this happens pretty frequently. Somebody hires me to go train their staff on something, or I go teach a bunch of attorneys at a conference, or I taught cops for 4 years or so in the academy. Would-be cops, I guess, they're recruits.
Is that like a course they have, or is that just like a lecture they get?
Yeah, it's so in the police academy, there's 22 weeks. One of those weeks is 40 full hours of CIT, crisis intervention training. So I taught the intro, the mental health overview, 3 hours, and then I did scenarios and evaluations at the end to make sure they were implementing what they learned. So it's like, it's in there. If you don't teach it, it's not in there. And same thing with any of the other groups that I present to. It's just a nice exposure. I do it frequently at schools for parents. Parents come in and we talk about like social media stuff and how to help your kids navigate that world and how to help yourself navigate that world. We talk about emotional functioning, of course. I do it at my church. Actually, this coming Sunday, I'm covering for my pastors because they're a married husband and wife couple. They're out of town, and he's turned the pulpit over to me. So I'm gonna. 2 weeks ago, I taught emotional functioning in its core as a pathway to knowing God better, because you can't be intimate with anyone, let alone the divine, if you're not vulnerable. And vulnerability is done through practicing letting go. And the best way to learn to let go is to let your emotions flow fully in the moment that you feel them, and then move on to the next moment. And if you practice that enough, you can find yourself being vulnerable and then growing intimate with people. So that was one sermon. This sermon's going to be about something else that's rolling around in my head. I haven't crystallized it yet, but that's one way. Like it's a different audience, right? And so hybridizing psychology and spirituality in that format introduces that to the audience, that both can coexist. One is not strange or weird or of the occult, and through that they know that they can go get help if they need it, or at least just journal differently or reflect on life in a different way. And that's what I'm trying to do with firearms community, is say, hey guys, this is not something to be scared of. Look at me, I'm doing it, right? And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess it's not that spooky. And then curiosity grows, and then more emails come in, and then I fire off some resources and here, pick up this book. And that's probably a good segue into a guy I didn't mention earlier. I said, my good friend and mentor who brought me the concept of intentionality, of knowing why you do what you do. His name's Christian Conte, and Conte is how you spell the last name. His book, Walking Through Anger, his latest book, is on yield theory. It's this way of dealing with people where you meet them where they are. And it's an excellent book for anyone to read. It's very, very digestible, very applicable to anything, and it'll improve your communication. So pick up Walking Through Anger by Christian Conte. That's one of the things that I regularly reference and I throw out to people all the time. If you just kind of are like, your curiosity's piqued, you're like, all right, cool, I'll check out Jake's emotional functioning videos. What else can I read? Read Walking Through Anger by Christian Conte. It's amazing. And then I got a zillion other books I can throw at you, depending on your interests too.
Well, that's actually one of the things that I've been trying to do, is ask everybody for a book that they'd recommend. So
that is probably right at the top of my list for every person.
Well, I just dropped the link to his website,
Nice.
but I'll drop a link to the Amazon so I can get a cut of it if he's on Amazon in the description whenever we're finished here. So before we go ahead.
Oh, let me grab this thing here. Smeggy 42. Everyone out there has, quote, anxiety. I think it takes away from people who are actually struggling. Man, I could not. It's like, louder for the people in the back, dude. Not at all kidding. Trauma is the other buzzword that everybody's got trauma. No, you don't. No, you don't. We have to stop pathologizing normal responses to life. You got fired from your job. That sucks. You will push through it. It is not traumatizing. That's not trauma. Trauma has a very high bar to meet. It's very unique, and that's not it. So anxiety, depression, like people are like, I'm so depressed right now. It's and I think that waters down the people who are actually struggling, for sure. PTSD. God, there was that article by that idiot. I try to refrain from judgmental language, but this idiot who shot the AR for the first time, and he wrote a New York Times article like in 2018 or 2017. Yeah, and he's like, I got a mild case of PTSD from it. It's like, MFer, Don't you ever. I was so angry about that, and it
Well,
had
it's
almost
tone
nothing to
deaf,
do with the
right?
gun.
It's so harmful to the people that actually are dealing with stuff like
Yeah, man, it just
marginalizing.
co-ops it. And yeah, it hijacks the severity of it, and it diminishes the impact, the gravity of what that illness actually is. Like, and a lot of us now are starting to turn our heads around the idea that post-traumatic stress is not a disorder. It's actually an injury to the brain, and we've got lots of research substantiating that. One of the gals we interviewed, Shauna Springer, on the podcast, she talks about the stellate ganglion block, and you can hear all about it. I'm not going to talk about it here, but listen to this Shauna Springer interview if you're interested in PTSD, and not PTSD, but as an PTSI injury. It's very, very fascinating stuff. But anyway, yeah, that makes me really angry. And something else that I wanted to say was, like, the weaponizing of mental illness to, I'm not saying we can't joke. Please don't understand me. I love humor. I love dark humor. I can laugh, but you have to know what you're laughing about. And when we say this weather is so bipolar, it's like, you know, there's people who actually have bipolar disorder. They're actually really suffering, right? It's really unfair to like throw that away, talking about how the weather was suddenly sunny when it was just snowing. Or yeah, oh man, that baseball team is being so schizophrenic right now. It's like, okay, first of all, that's not even an accurate analogy. They're not having psychotic episodes, so they're not schizophrenic. What you mean is they're inconsistent. So we need to be precise in our language. We need to stop weaponizing the stuff, because it does diminish what's actually happening. And I'll say, oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, where's the line between like weaponizing it and inclusivity or whatever? Like, you know, being, you know what I mean? Like the negative or the oblivious.
Yeah. Well, you want to politely correct those people. I don't want to, I wouldn't come down like a ton of bricks on somebody who said that. I'd just be like, hey, man, like, you're using that word improperly. And then hopefully that invites a conversation. I'm not just condescending them sanctimoniously, being like, I'm so much better than you because I know what schizophrenia is in the book and you don't. Like, I want them to go, what do you mean? And then I say, well, schizophrenia is actually defined by the following criteria, and what you mean is the baseball team's inconsistent. And they're like, ha ha ha, it's just being funny. It's like, nah, it's not really that funny. It's because it's kind of lame. Like you wouldn't say, I know this happens, but it's also offensive when people say, you're such a cancer to the organization. Like, I don't know, man. Like, there's people out there struggling with cancer. Maybe we could find a different way to express that that's not so glib. So it's about language precision. I don't want to stand here and pretend like I'm some softy who's all offended all the time. I want to express myself accurately so that I'm understood, and not in a cavalier, cast off kind of way that may offend somebody sitting right next to me who's not going to speak up. And now I've lost rapport with that person. That's the real danger, right?
Well, it goes back to what you're talking about with intent too. If you can't,
yeah, exactly.
Intent, then you know what I mean. And when your intent should be to not get in the way of stuff. You should
try to know your audience. Yeah. But the final note I was going to put on anxiety is, we don't want anxiety to go away. We don't want depression to go away. We don't want anger to go away. We don't want any of this stuff to go away. We just want to acknowledge it for what it is. And in some cases, it's useful. It's okay to be depressed for a period of time, because usually that acts as a motivator to avoid the similar situation in the future that broke your heart or whatever. And anxiety can be quite the motivator to, study hard for the test or watch more game film to be a better athlete or whatever. We don't want to eliminate that stuff. We just want to be mindfully using it. When it enters into your life to such a degree that it's crippling and you can't function, you've lost lots of interest or ability. That's problematic. That's clinical diagnosable anxiety. So it's okay to say, I have anxiety right now. Like I've got a lot of anxiety before this test. It's like, yeah, I would too. It's a big test, right? Like we can validate that without completely watering it down and saying, I've got anxiety because I'm going to drive into rush hour today. It's like, maybe take side streets then. I don't know that that's an appropriate description of anxiety. Like maybe you just need to get more competent too. And that's one way to battle things like anxiety is chiefly rooted in fear. Fear of what? I don't know, disappointment, being being surprised, whatever it is. And the best way to avoid that kind of thing is to align your expectations with reality. If reality is rush hour starts at 4:30 and it used to start at 5:15, you got to meet reality where it is and stop saying I have anxiety because rush hour is starting early. Align your expectations with reality. Say, well, I'm going to go drive into traffic now, and it's going to be a little rougher than I would like. That's a more accurate description. That's more expressive. It's not judgmental. It doesn't put you in the victim's role either. Like, it's happening to me. I have this anxiety that I can't control. It's not psychological chicken pox. It doesn't just descend from nowhere. We have control over our thoughts. We have control over where we direct our attention. And if we know that and we practice that, then we're a lot less likely to succumb to the environmental stimuli that push us into one way or another. We can go, oh, I recognize that I'm really getting angry right now because people around me are driving like idiots. Okay, it is rush hour and people are trying to get home. Align my expectations with reality. I don't have to be angry. I can just, give a little more space and continue on. Then I'm not victim to my circumstances. I'm in charge of my own decision making, my own mentality.
Yeah, pull over and get a coffee or something and wait till you can drive home, at your leisure, right?
And then be yelled at by my wife for being late. No.
Well, not everybody can do that. Yeah. So one of the things you mentioned before, I wanted to throw it out there, is when you're talking about, I don't know if I guess I used the word normalization. I didn't want to get into that, but just the idea of bringing it to awareness. I've been listening to a lot of podcasts that are interviews with various veterans coming out of different roles of the global war on terror, and at the tip of the spear level, these guys get a lot of attention, a lot of resources put at them, and they kind of just casually talk about this stuff because they're getting resources that the rest of the military isn't getting. And I mean, they know that, but at the same time, they don't really spend a lot of time on it. But I've noticed that they'll take readings, basically, like they'll take, as they get into the roles of special operations or something, especially nowadays, they'll give them diagnostics tests, basically, to see what their mental state is. And then after a few years of breaching doors and falling off of stuff and, being bounced around, even with a helmet on, they keep doing these diagnostic tests. And then it's the equivalent of an oil chest, sticking the dipstick in there. And as soon as they get results back that are physically outside of parameter, then you're out of here. And, back in the day, it was, oh, no, I'm feeling fine, doc, because they didn't want to not be doing their thing. And, because guys got out and turned around and said, here's what we used to do. Let's stop the guy, let's not let these new guys do this. And plus, the new guys just don't want to come out worn out. I think that part of it, I was just going to bring that part out. I'm sure you've heard of it or, aware of it, but I'm thinking like just bringing that kind of like, we like everything military surplus in at least the gun community. We like military ammo surplus. We like rifle surplus. We like clothes surplus. We like their tactics. We like watching them in movies and stuff. And now that and plus if it's special operations, then it has to be better, right?
Oh, yeah.
So if these guys are going in and getting a mental diagnostic done so that they can tell what they are now versus in the future, is there something there? Like, hey, when you're 18, do this mental exercise, trying to figure stuff out, be able to tell your brothers, your buddies, your brothers and sisters, be able to monitor their stuff the same way you would in a team, same way you would in a small unit. And then the same way, like when you get out, like, that at some point you've got a physical issue, like you were saying, TBI or post-traumatic stress. Nobody says D anymore. They don't need the D no more. That's lots of reasons, but that's because it's gotten around. People started to figure out, to start using that nomenclature, that terminology. Anyway, I was just going to put that out there.
I think that's brilliant. I'm gonna steal that. Actually, I'd never considered that idea before. And you think back, like how much have we taken from military research to space research? Velcro is the low hanging fruit. Why?
Sure, you guys have to do, right? With all the stuff that the stress tests they did on the astronauts and stuff, they must have been using all that for medical field.
I don't know. I assume so. I don't know what the direct lineage is of stuff like that, but I honestly didn't know they were doing the pre and post, dipstick tests like you're mentioning. That's pretty cool stuff. I analogize it to a concussion protocol in sports.
Yeah. No, I was going to say I don't know nothing about sports, but I think they got it. Special operations got it from sports because those guys are worth $1 million. They're not saying, hey, what's worried about the guys? They're worried about their $1 million investments and how many times they're getting knocked over, right?
Yeah, and there's some optics there too, right? Like, oh, we care about the players, and then there, the NFL Players Association is like, no, you don't. Like, why are you expanding the season if you care so much about us? But the less cynical side of that, directly applicable to the gun community is, and this is where I get to start calling out, major corporations who have yet to put our screenings flyers in their boxes, in their packaging, is to say why. Like, I don't understand it. I don't understand why every manufacturer in America doesn't have WTTA.org/love, take free and anonymous mental health screening today on every single box of every single piece of ammunition and firearm accessory that they send out, because it's legally defensible. First of all, it's a big hit in the community. Every single manufacturer that's done it, from Arms Corps, who was our first big onboard sponsor, to Ruger, to High Point, Bursa.
Arms Corps wrote the URL on the box, right?
Yes, they did. Yeah, they were the first to do that. And yet several who I will not mention have balked. And all I can figure is that the culture is such that they're just somehow afraid, irrationally. This is, again, emotion driving decision making instead of logic. They're afraid that whoever they is, the gun grabbers, are going to see like, oh, you're acknowledging that mental illness is a problem, therefore we're going to sue you harder. It's like, they're going to sue you anyway. Like, at least when you get into court, you can be like, hey, look, man, we printed this on our box. We're trying. The alcohol community did that with the drunk driving campaign. .gov did not force the alcohol industry into doing drink responsibly. The alcohol industry did that on its own. So gun community needs to figure out real fast that if it doesn't want .gov to tell it to do these things, it needs to do them themselves. And I don't know why the big boys aren't doing it. They should be. And there's no losing here other than in their own minds, because every company we've gone to has had overwhelming great feedback. Nobody has said, I think this is a bad idea. Nobody's lost revenue over it. You know what I mean? And Ruger just doubled down on their commitment to us. That was awesome. We've got a press release coming out, so I guess I'll just tease it now. They started with 25K last September, and just a month ago they bumped it to another 25K to 50. Like that, and they're going to start doing it all their packaging starting before 2023 was their commitment. So it's like, okay, if Ruger and Arms Corps can do it, probably everybody else can do it. And that's how we really start to normalize the conversation. You want to really talk about how we move the needle on discussion of these issues. You can't go to a party anymore. I know it's been like 30 years in the making, but you can't go to a party anymore and have nobody at the party ask, are you okay to drive? Like that's not a thing anymore. If you're at one of those parties, like now maybe there's not as much action taken of like, no, I'm definitely going to wrestle your keys away from you, dude. Like that happens too, by the way. And I was in college 25 years ago. So I guess actually it's more like 40 or 45 years. This drunk driving campaign has been going on, but that was going on back then. It was like, hey, you sure to drive? Yeah, I'm fine. They can lie to you, but at least the conversation is happening. If we get this across the board in all packaging everywhere, all accessories, all firearms, all ammunition, all retail stores, all ranges, there's nowhere to hide now when you're out on the range with your buddies and one of them is just like off, right? Not talking like he usually talks, eyes downcast, grumbling about something that normally he doesn't grumble about. You go, hey, you all right? And that's not the way to ask the question, but maybe 2 years ago, the question doesn't even get asked. The way you ask the question, by the way, is, dude, you look like you're kind of out of it today and I'm a little concerned. Is something going on in your life that I need to help you with? Like, that's the way you ask the question. Very direct, very honest. And if you have rapport with the person, they'll be like, yeah, it's just, wife's been under the weather. I've had to take care of the kids, and I've got a screaming sick baby with an ear infection. And you're like, all right, cool. That adds up. That makes sense. You're probably not suicidal, right? But if he goes, no, it's nothing, man. You better ask another question. That's where we need to get with this. And those are your trusted buddies. When you're at the workspace, I don't care if you own guns or not at this point. You're at the workplace, and somebody's doing the same thing with the same behaviors, and you're sitting around the water cooler or the break room, and fighting the snack machine to dispense your Cheetos or whatever. Ask the question, like, "Hey, man, you look a little off." Just simply saying that communicates a message of, "I'm here for you. I may not have the answers, but I notice." And then the recipient of that goes, "Thanks." And maybe that's all it needs, because you don't know that the dude wasn't going to go home and eat a bullet that night. And maybe he won't. And we don't have empirical data to substantiate that works. But are we really going to roll the dice on not doing it? So let's do that. And then maybe we turn around 15 years from now and we see suicides have decreased and happiness has increased, and everybody's healthier and better, and we all just high five, and then Walk the Talk America works itself out of a job too. That would be ideal.
Well, when you talk about talking to yourself or doing things, efforting to alleviate the need for your occupation, and that's, I think, part of the whole thing too, is when, as gun owners, as the gun community comes up with solutions to these issues that there's always been guns, right? Ever since this country's been around, at least, there's always been guns. Mm-hmm. And there's always been small enough guns that someone could hurt themselves or somebody else with. These issues are relatively new. So I think that as gun owners solve these relatively recent modern issues that have come up with, around our possession of property and the laws and the media attention and all that kind of stuff, as we solve that, we'll be leading the way for other segments of society that don't have a fundamental, constitutionally protected element to them, driving a car or, I don't know, anything. And like maybe marijuana is a good thing. Marijuana and maybe the war on drugs in general. I don't know how marijuana got to where it is, because there was nothing like the Second Amendment to unite pot smokers. But the same way that I'm assuming as a pot smoker, you could, because it's an illegal thing and all that, and because it's looked down in society and all that, you might have concerns going to seek out help, right? Because, as that, I don't know how to say it, but as those years get pulled back and there's less perceived issue and you can go seek out help for other things, then, there's less tension, there's more relief and less stress in the world.
Well, yeah, you're right.
I guess what I'm saying is I think that gun owners have this unified fundamental thing that kind of keeps us together. And as we learn to deal with the suicide, which is a big element of something we're being persecuted because of, as we learn to deal with that, we'll also be teaching the country how to work together to treat, period, right? Just to be good to each other.
That's exactly it. You couldn't have stated it any better. That's where it starts. I read a great article recently, sort of depressing, but it was great. It was talking about mass shootings, and one of the authors, these are two researchers, I think they're both psychiatrists actually, who, one of them said, mass violence is suicide turned outward. And I was like, that is brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. You're so depraved internally, and you're so full of shame and rage that you don't even have the ability to take your own life unless you take others with you. This is deep on such a metaphorical, archetypal level. This would be an entire podcast unto itself, but it was so brilliant. And I thought, man, you know what? We will stop mass shootings if we focus on healing people. And I don't mean individual psychotherapy. I mean cultural change within families, which is a generation away, admittedly, if we can do some major adjustments right now. But it's the way to get to gun violence. People are like, gun violence. And it's like, well, is suicide violence? I used to want to parse that out and say, no, not really. Violence is violence perpetrated upon other people. And I could cite definitions and all sorts of articles to substantiate that. But I'm like, no, suicide's really a violent act upon self. So I'm actually increasingly more comfortable lumping suicides into gun violence. But that's an academic discussion. What the people who are trying to take our rights away are doing is lumping it in intentionally to augment the numbers. That's not okay. That's an intellectually dishonest argument. So for all intent and purpose, suicide should be separated, but it is a violent act. And if you want to talk about gun violence, where do you go? Suicides. They're the biggest number. There's no getting away from that. You back yourself into a corner if you're trying to play word games. So yes, we will affect more things and more people by focusing on just being mentally well. If you're mentally well, if you're healthy, you have a good diet, you surround yourself with positive people, you're engaged in activities that you enjoy, you're fulfilling yourself with a career that you like, you're bettering humanity, you're tending to your friends and your family, and you're raising kids or not raising kids, you're raising crops. It doesn't matter. If you're mentally well, you're not going to do violent things against yourself or others. You're not going to start cutting your arms. You're not going to dive into a pill bottle. You're not going to drink excessively for no reason. You'll just be well, and there's no reason to antagonize others or speak in snark or condescension, fire pot shots at people online. Your kids aren't going to be bullying other kids on the playground. We'll all get better if we use these tactics and techniques. I see you highlighted Play Nice's question there. You want to talk about that?
Oh, I've got a bunch here that I'm trying to, I'm going to jump up. I'm going to do them a little bit in different orders because Ozzy asked this one a long time ago, and I don't remember what it was in regards to. He says, do you think that the government media is perpetuating the decision, and is that unhealthy?
Do we know what decision, I wonder?
Nah, it was a while ago, so I apologize to Ozzy.
Yes, I think they are perpetuating whatever it is because .gov and media are in cahoots. So whatever you're asking, I agree.
Well, maybe I'm going to ask you. I've been just in case you know, or maybe it was something I was watching that you were on. I was watching something recently in the last couple of weeks, and they talked about a comparison to like the movie Top Gun, the new Top Gun movie, and how much it's going to cost to, promote that. How much it's going to cost to have primetime airwaves and the production of high quality commercials, and they compared that to the amount of airtime given to the mass murderers. And then the concept was, is the media creating this or not? And how do they justify the amount of time, effort, and cost and the high production value of the efforts they put out there and when they put it out there and the saturation we all know about? But I was like, no one's ever talked about how much it costs and what would you say, like what they've sacrificed, because they would have made a lot of money in that prime time slots, and plus all the time they spent on production. And I can't remember what I was watching, but somebody referenced that.
Yeah, I think it's manifold, but the two that jump out at me are yes, there's an intent. I think there are some sinister forces that want to take away our rights for various reasons. That's fine. We can discuss that. But I also think there's a bit of, if not a large bit of, I don't know if I would say it's innocence or complacency or lethargy, but there's the people promoting that stuff on the ground level. Let's say they're not the ones behind the curtains pulling the levers, the execs who have an agenda for whatever reason. The anchors, the producers, the script writers who are just being told to do what they do, they may believe it. They may want to do it. But I think a lot of them are just trying to protect their jobs, and they're just in the industry. I have a journalism degree. That's my undergrad is in journalism. And journalism, not what it was when I was learning it in 1998. It's sad. There's very little quality journalism left, and if whatever is left is hard to find because it lives in Substack subscriptions, and there's some really good stuff on Substack, but largely the media you see on the TV and in the mainstream stuff is just it's I don't want to say propaganda, but that's a pretty good word, because there's money behind it, and it's done for revenue generation. So this is what I mean about the innocence or the complacency. They know that if they run a story about mass shooters, they're going to get clicks and eyeballs, and that drives advertising dollars, and advertising dollars make the machine go. If they run a story about suicides, it's like breaking wind in church. Nobody cares. If they run a story about a dog that was saved from the speeding car, it's fun, but nobody's paying for that. So the old adage of if it bleeds, it leads, it has a lot of credibility. The yellow journalism has returned. The yellow journalism from the early 1900s has returned. You got screamy headlines, and people pay attention to that. It triggers the limbic system. It triggers excitement and fear. And those things are geared to make you want to buy things, and advertisers love it when you buy their things. So whether it's the new iPhone, which is exciting, or the competition with your neighbor for the next riding lawnmower, which is fear and excitement, which we call jealousy, then you're going to be paying attention. So the more eyeballs they can capture, the better. The agenda behind gun grabbing may be behind that, probably is. There's certain people who just want to usher in a statist society, and a lot of them are in media. Okay. But the willing, or I guess the useful idiots, the willing, compliant people who are on the front lines promoting it, who are actually delivering the message, I think are just by and large lazy. They're there for their jobs. That I don't think they
don't see it as
it's not a controversy to them. No. And largely they're insulated, so it doesn't affect them. They're not the single mom from Compton who really needs the semi-automatic pistol to carry in her purse to protect her kids,
or at least has an actual reason to make that decision. Like
exactly.
So I was going to say that I went to I've been to a lot of pro 2A rallies, right? I like to go to them. They're interesting. And I've been to a couple of anti-gun rallies. And the big one I went to in Phoenix once was 18,000 people, they say. And it was many, many, many times larger than any 2A rally I've been to. So it was definitely a lot of people. And what I got from just experiencing that on a Saturday one day was they were all there to hate Trump, and guns was the reason. But they could care less about guns, I expect. They were there because they hated Republicans, and they hated the other side, whatever the other side was for them. And so for me, that's one of the things that's enforced my opinion and my optimism, that people like DC Project, people like yourselves and Mike, and other efforts that are out there to create awareness, true awareness, will take the firearms off the table and let those people who truly just want to hate Trump or whoever, fill in the blank, the other side, do it with some other item. They got plenty of other things they can complain about and use as weapons. Once we take guns off of there because they're educated to know that they're friends or whatever, lots of different strategies. But once we take it off the table, then it's a win. And then they all have to stand around going, oh, wait a minute, the NFA was a big deal and now it's gone. I guess we can live in harmony with belt-fed full autos, and that's not a big deal.
Right. No, that's a good point. Great point.
So DJ put in here, so I'm going to start wrapping up by just hitting these questions from others.
Rapid fire.
So with the work you've already done, suiting you well to leadership, when will you enter an elected office, is he saying, I guess? Well, it sounds like you already were on that board. I mean, that's not technically, I guess, what he's talking about.
Right, yeah. Did you just assume I'm not leading? I had a dalliance with running for local, our state assembly here in Nevada in 2019. And I got, for the listening audience, you can't see how close my hand is to my nose, but I got this close to everything. And I pulled the plug, and I refunded all the money that I'd gathered from the people. And it cost me a fortune, wiped out our savings account. And it was the best decision I've ever made. I'm not going to be running for office probably ever again. I can't say that for certainty, because who knows what future brings, but I realized how much more difference I can make not being in the halls of Carson City, especially in 2020. And thank God, what a bullet I dodged there with COVID, and in the particular makeup of our legislature is it was like, I don't know, 75% Dem, and I was running as an R, and I'm not an R anymore. I unregistered. I don't don't do partisan politics anymore. I'm an independent, or here we call it a nonpartisan. But I got really, really, really like disgusted, like viscerally sick with my own party, and I couldn't even support what they were doing. There's good individuals in there, but a lot of them even were super spineless, and so I pulled the plug, and it was the best decision I made, because it cleared the path for not only for Walk the Talk America, but for me to help augment Zephyr Wellness and do lots and lots of things in the community. I formed a charter school. Like I helped. I didn't do it by myself, but I chaired a board for a charter school that opened that my kids now go to. You know, school choice. Like that was a huge thing. And I never would have been able to do that if I were in elected office. And there was some friction in my particular race internally in the party. It was stupid middle drama, but there's no doubt in my mind that I would have absolutely crushed anybody that I went up against. No question. Either party, it would not have been close, because I don't lose things like that. But I just I wasn't going to be effective when you're in a minority party. In that particular situation, nothing would have been done. So I'm way more effective in the community now. I really appreciate that thought. That's not a compliment that I want to like gloss over or take lightly. I really appreciate you saying that. Means a lot. And leadership is not something that I've come lightly into, because I wasn't kidding when I said I was bullied as a child for like 12 years. It was more like 9, but the residue continued into college, and I was a pretty shallow, empty person who was well liked by everyone, but that turned me into a sort of narcissist. And then I became really dramatic and after college, and like I just didn't know who I was. So I've always resisted that call as much as I wanted it. My ego wanted the titles and the fame and the glory. Like now I don't want it at all, and I just find myself stumbling into things. So it means a lot that somebody else would recognize that. So thank you for saying that. I'm not doing elected office though. I'll take appointments. Somebody wants to appoint me to something, I'm just not running. Screw campaigns.
Well, and I'm going to, thanks for that. And then I'll add, going back to veterans again, I keep watching these podcasts, and the way that they've just undertaken, I'm going to say, the leadership of helping each other come out and create pipelines to help each other, you know, as they come out of their terms, like whatever their enlistments were, the different branches. And I'm sure I'm seeing, obviously, you know, the extremes, because I'm seeing the people that are so motivated that they're also sharing everything in podcasts and stuff and in that. But what I am seeing is a lot of people that are competent, and they're coming out of a situation where they came from countries where they saw the worst case scenarios of, like, you know, people that I think one of the times they said they do civil war as a national sport. Like they're just constantly fighting with each other. So they've seen that, and they've dealt with, I mean, literally some of them have dealt with, you know, sitting down with people who hate each other. And we've got military intelligence at a level that we never had, I don't think, since World War II. And we saw the result of military intelligence after World War II was a massive result. So we're going to see a massive, like, I can't even imagine what we're going to see when the military intelligence group of people come out and turn their attentions on, well, right now they're all making money, but as soon as they quit making money and start paying attention to politics. But then I was also going to say that, you know, what we're seeing in these podcasts and what gets most of the attention is always the tip of the spear. But what gets overlooked is that to get 12 people to do something in a specific place on the other side of the planet, or to get a drone to fly around on the other side of the planet, requires a massive infrastructure, massive infrastructures that nobody pays attention to, unless it's like one of those shows about the aircraft carriers or something. But all the boring facilitation, all the behind the scenes, those people got to see the bureaucracy. And if they're anything like me, I don't know if you were in any kind of bureaucracy at all, but you know, you taste that and you're like, no, there's a reason. I don't like it because I don't hate government. I don't like bureaucracy, and I don't like the scoundrels that hide in bureaucracy. And I get frustrated by what I'm seeing, is because I can tell what's happening because I've been around it. So I think that we're seeing people that have experienced the same thing and have got the foul taste. But if you got not a lot to lose, like they didn't come back to a boom like World War II, they're coming back to famine. So they've got reason to get in there and be in the game, and they have more incentive, right? So I'm thinking we've got the potential to see people that not just these tip of the spears, but the people that were like totally able to understand the facilitation of the whole thing and like the behind the scenes, like I'm saying, like just all the different infrastructure, thinking about intelligence and getting materials and stuff over there, plus people that see in the budget. Everybody complains about the $1,000 hammer. Somebody writes the check for $1,000 hammer, and that person gets out, and that person is in their community. And these people don't just stop existing; they take that experience and act on it often. So I think we've got a lot of potential to see something like one of the cities, Philadelphia, Chicago, one of the cities where there's some issues, flip or have a different type of leadership and see some change. And then people go, oh, paradigm shift. We can.
That would be great.
And then we see a complete shift. I think we see a lot
really optimistic
going in with the racers, right?
Yeah, that's really optimistic. I love that. I'd never heard that before, and that's a great take.
Because I don't think there's any evidence to show that we're about to tip over. I think it's a pendulum, and I think that it always looks like it's about to be at the most extreme when the pendulum swings back the other way. And we've got we got all kinds of trends and stuff, and one of them is when things get out of hand, it kind of gets back into shape again. So I think that some of this stuff that they've been putting out, it's not our adversaries, the people that are against us as firearms owners and the people that are just being chaotic in positions of leadership, they're not just doing one thing poorly. They're doing so many things poorly that I think there's a potential for disruption in a positive.
It's a good segue into what you've highlighted there with from Gunmetal Guy.
Let's get back to that. I'm just
the language takeover, right? I mentioned I'm pretty active on Twitter, and I follow a lot of disparate accounts and a lot of people whose opinions I value, irrespective of their political tilt. As long as you're not like an ideologue, I'm probably following what you have to say. And the really obvious opinion seems to be that the leftists, not the left, not the liberals, there's lots of us out there who would consider ourselves, center left or liberal or whatever, that aren't leftists, who aren't socialists, who aren't trying to take over society and all that stuff. They've overplayed their hand. They inched and inched and inched, and then it was like, let's take 2 feet. And everybody was like, hell no, you're not doing that. You're not coming in and teaching woke stuff to our students. You're not going to sit there and tell me that a 12-month-old can identify his or her own gender because he's pulling hair clips out of his hair. No, we're not doing that. And now the blowback is coming. And I've seen it's happening obviously more on the left than the right. The right's got its own brand of crazy, which definitely needs to be dealt with. Don't mistake me. But the vast overwhelming majority of what's happening that's afflicting this country with its disease pathogens of the mind is from the left. And it's not a close ratio. It's something like 85-15 probably. And there's abandonment from the fringes, the base, right? The political base that we always have to rally to get people to the polls or whatever. It's like those people don't exist anymore because they all fled. Your base has shrunk. And that's what I'm noticing is like I don't want to call it a red wave because I don't even know what red and blue are anymore, but there's definitely a centrist movement. There's an alt middle that's right, rising up. And I don't know what form that's going to take. I don't think the libertarians have the stomach or the structure or the leadership to pull it off, or the cohesion.
Exactly.
It's definitely not the Greens. Yeah. So it may take a couple of election cycles for like this, alt middle party to assert itself. In the meantime, though, the centrists, the former Democrats who've left the Democratic Party, the Republicans who have been turned off by the MAGAs, have all bowed their necks and said, we are taking back our language, our culture, our values. And it's a really cool, like red, white, and blue makes purple effect happening. And it's really, really neat to see. And to that point, like these words that have been so overused victimhood, assault, marginalized, trauma I mentioned earlier, racist, bigot, like things that used to matter, Nazi, like things that actually have historic meaning are just tossed around like Kleenex. I don't know why that happened or when, but it's stopping. And that's a cool thing. It's neat to see that. And that's also encouraging. It's as encouraging as what you just said about like people coming back and, maybe running for office and taking over city councils and that kind of thing and going, no, we're going to erase some stuff and we're going to start over. Unfortunately, you can't rebuild statues that were torn down, but you can restore lots of policies. And I hope that sanity takes root. And what I really hope is that the people who take over, those of us who are, in the 2 standard deviations away from the mean, will not continue fighting, but just let them become irrelevant. There's a whole bunch of people out there who are angry, emotionally driven, don't have anybody's best interest in mind except for themselves. And the best way to deal with them is to set good boundaries and say, no, and then walk away, stop engaging. And I hope that happens. That would be really cool.
That I would assume that kind of requires some sort of monopolization of a person who they're abusing or victimizing, right? And when there's a world with connection, I would think it's tougher and tougher for people to have that relationship with their victims, right? Hopefully.
That's a different show unto itself that I'm more than happy to do too, to talk about, internal, we call it domestic violence or cycle of abuse. Often rooted in personality disorders of the cluster B variety. I'll go back to Josh Slocum's podcast, Disaffected, if you want to learn more about that. But yes, absolutely. Yep. It requires good boundaries. It requires emotionally healthy self-awareness. It requires good self-efficacy. It requires a foundational belief in something bigger than yourself that you can retreat to when the emotional arm flapping and mouth frothing happens, so that you can withstand that type of attack. But now, when we see it happening on a broad scale, occupationally, politically, geopolitically, it's really tough to stand up against that, because you're like, is my job threatened? Is HR going to call me in because I took a principled stand based on ethic and values against this horrible person who's just, squawking? Those are hard decisions to make. But I think the more and more of us who make them, the less and less relevant the emotional hostage taking will become. Survivor's guilt.
Yeah. So DJ put this one up. It's kind of off topic, but in some ways, I guess, relates a little bit, I'm sure, to some of the situations that are out there. But anyway, got some time to talk about survival guilt or a few words of wisdom.
Yeah, there's a different kinds of survivor's guilt. Some of it has to do with, I don't know, DJ, but I'm just going to go straight to the military type of survivor's guilt, where you come back from combat and you go, why was I allowed to live and my buddies died? That's a pretty common one, and it can be translated into mass shootings, for example. If a school shooting occurs, you're left with like, well, why was I allowed to live? But then it can trickle into unfairness, right? I had a colleague who is a child psychiatrist, and there are very, very few child psychiatrists. It doesn't pay very well. It's very hard work. It requires a fellowship after residency. And he was as healthy as they come. Jason Walenta is his name. He was 43 at the time. This was 2013 or 14. And he died of stomach cancer, got diagnosed. And then like 2.5 months later, he was dead. And I mean, I don't even think he ate meat. I think he was a vegetarian. He ran, half marathons and biked all the time. Just a health nut, stomach cancer, died. And you go, where's the justice in that, right? There's a survivor's guilt there that is a different flavor than the why was I allowed to live kind, where it's more of a, what am I supposed to do with this? How do we honor people? And then there's a survivor's guilt that has to do with suicide. And I experienced that recently because a year ago, a colleague of mine, Simeon Lupo, who is a mental health professional, licensed clinical social worker, director of behavioral health at a local behavioral health inpatient hospital, former military, family, newborn baby, took his own life with a gun, his own gun. And guess what? The community just moved on. We just swept it under the rug. Nobody's done anything since. I've been in touch with his wife. We're trying to do some stuff, but you look around and you go, what the hell did I miss? I texted the guy a week, 2 weeks before this happened. We're talking about having lunch together. Like, what did I miss? Mike Sedini talks about this with regard to his friend and former president of his company, Bill Strominger, who took his own life with a firearm. Presumably, we can only read between the lines because there was no note left, but presumably because he'd gotten a recent DUI and he thought that because of the DUI, he wasn't going to work in the firearms industry anymore. There's a survivor's guilt there that says, how could I have stopped this? One of the best guests we've ever had on the podcast, Matt Miller, PhD, by the way, director of the National Veteran Suicide Prevention Program for the VA. He made a profound comment to me when I first interviewed him on my own podcast on Noggin Notes. He says, I don't know that suicide is preventable. And it was like, needle skips off the record. And he says, here's why. I was the mental health guy on my air base, and my best friend took his own life. And I was supposed to stop that by my job description, right? I'm paraphrasing here. This is not his words, these are mine. It was like, I don't know that it's preventable. And here's why we shouldn't talk about suicide being preventable. If we talk like suicide's preventable, it inherently implies that somebody else should be able to prevent it. Therefore, we end up leaving guilt with the people who survived, who quote unquote should have prevented the suicide. He says, I don't know if it's preventable. I don't know if it's healthy that we continue pushing that message. So my thoughts on survivor's guilt are this. We only act in a moment with the information we have at that moment. After we act, we obtain more information. There is no should have. There really isn't any could have. There could have been a wish I would have. That's different. But you can't should on yourself. And I did a YouTube video on that. It's a little tongue-in-cheek, but you can't should on yourself because it invites a reality that never could have existed, which is, I wish I'd had more information at the time I made the decision or didn't make the decision or whatever. That's the survivor's guilt, regardless of what you're surviving from. If somebody actually perished or if it's just a bad decision you made and you lost time or resources, wishing you'd not hit on 16 in that blackjack game and you went bust and lost all your money when you were drunk at the casino, that's survivor's guilt too. You're like, oh, I'm still standing here, but my bank account's empty. We all have moments of regret. And I would just say, I would reiterate, we only decide based on information we have at the time. It's only after we make the decision that we get more information. So we don't get to say I should have, because there's no way you could have. Actually, by its definition, psychosis means that it's a departure from reality. So by its very definition, shoulding on yourself is psychotic. You're inviting a reality that never could have happened and pretending that it was or whatever. And you therefore needed to do something differently and you couldn't have. So just take peace in knowing that you did what you did in the moment that you did it, whether or not you returned the phone call, whether or not you picked up the text message or said the wrong thing or the right thing. You did what you did at the time based on the information you had at that moment. Only afterward do you maybe regret something, but you don't get to unring the bell. You don't get to betray your former self, as Jordan Peterson said. And that's what you did. And so we get to encourage people to embrace the idea of forgiveness. Forgiveness is not for the other person. It's for you, so that you can live in peace moving forward, free to make new decisions, from that point on. So forgive, let go, be non-attached, and that's it. Meet yourself where you are.
Right on. And I appreciate that, because there's no way to know exactly what position, what point of view he's coming from. So that was a great way to cover some stuff with that. I was going to ask a couple of then just general questions from back when when you were chatting before. I didn't want to interrupt you for this, but have you talked to Professor David Yamane?
Yes, I have. We had him on the podcast a couple episodes ago. Lovely man.
Okay.
Bought his T-shirt. I wear it proudly. It says, "Guns are normal. Normal people use guns." I love it.
Yep, and I think that would be a good conversation to have with you and him chatting about specifically exploration into dealing with antis, and maybe since with him in your experience specifically with like the research and researchers, and I don't think that there's an adversarial relationship. There may be in individuals, but I think in general it's ignorance or unawareness, right? And it's just a matter of crossing bridges or figuring out filling in gaps. Then they figure out leave us alone, and then they go worry about swimming pools or whatever else they want to research on, right? But I don't think we got to worry about hating researchers as much as getting them off our backs, right? And
yeah,
then,
or get them to research the right thing. That would be nice instead of perseverating on mass shootings. You know, maybe perseverate on suicides. I will say this: Dr. Emmy Betts, who is a psychiatrist out of Colorado, who started the Colorado Gunshot Project, she gets it. Amy Barnhorst, who is another psychiatrist, Dr. Amy Barnhorst out of UC Davis, she gets it. They're starting to center their research more on access, which is great because it promotes responsible storage, which we're all about. And we define responsible storage as preventing unauthorized access. So whoever's unauthorized to have your gun, it may be you at one point. But that's cool. We're starting to see a shift there and away from the whole like control sales thing. So that's neat. It's incremental, but it's getting there.
Did you say Colorado Gunshot Project?
Mm-hmm. It's something that predates Hold My Guns, and what the Colorado Gunshot Project is doing is it's out of the universities there. The UC system has partnered with local gun stores to hold guns for people who don't want them around in a time of crisis. And that, I mean, it doesn't even have to be a crisis. You could just be leaving town and you don't want your guns in the house. They'll take them for you. So they've promoted this map and they've studied it and they've done research and surveys. And I've been a part of that. Mike's been a part of that with Emmy and her team. They're wonderful people. They're great. I wouldn't necessarily say they're pro 2A, but they're at least neutral, which is an improvement over a lot of researchers.
That's awesome. I never heard of that one. And then I was going to ask if you've met or talked with Kim Petters.
Kim Petters was on our show talking about her cannabis use. She got off of all psychotropics because she was using cannabis and has to, walk that line. She was a great interview too. She's awesome. She's the Delaware delegate to DC Project.
Right on.
I need to circle back with her. I haven't talked to her in like a year.
Yeah, she's one of my favorites in all of Second Amendment advocacy. I mean, first off, she did an amazing service to the country, and she's and because of that, she's uniquely able to, basically, I mean, she's right at the top of the DC Project. Whatever. If there's the what's that superhero movie? If there's a,
she's Captain Marvel.
Yeah, she's going to be in the team that's like winning.
She flies in space and can like stop ships. She defeated Thanos.
And then on that, well, I was going to ask you about it more from her PTS side, and then just facets from there. But obviously, like I say, she's also an advocate for marijuana and firearms, the only one we really have. And on that tangent, I guess, have you heard of or talked with Tactical Tangerine?
I met Tangie in at Kevin Dixie's Train and Learn last year. I missed it this year because we had overlapping events, but I met her at Katie's Train and Learn, but specifically at a panel discussion hosted by Devin Perkins. And Tangie's great, but I didn't get to know her super well. I follow her on Instagram and stuff, and but I haven't sat down and like had an in-depth conversation. Where are you going with that? Because I'd like to have her on the podcast too.
I just got done listening to her because I knew that she had been at KD's thing, but I just listened to her on Stogies and straps and
Oh,
Stogies.
Stogies and straps.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, wait, why the hell hasn't
The other
Katie asked me to be on there? I smoke cigars like a.
Well, you got to go there because he sits there with you. So you have to be in Georgia, I guess. Is he in Georgia?
Oh, we could do it over Zoom.
That's true. That would be interesting.
Maybe I'll fly him to Reno. I don't think he's been to Reno yet.
So you have met everybody then. So that would be neat to have a couple of, or I would definitely be interested in hosting some conversations so that you all could just have a non-agenda based conversation or round table, whatever.
That would be amazing. Actually, what we should do is, like you were saying earlier, with the idea of like just gathering everybody in person and throw a mic in the middle, or several mics or however we want to do it. But the point is like just open it up, have a 12-person podcast, and just ping off each other. Throw Ed Garanti on in there, and get some Rob Pincus just so people can fight.
And like I say, without having necessarily an agenda or a focus on news of the day, because although there's news of the day, I think we win when we start to take that in stride, realize that our opponents aren't our adversaries, they're just ignorant. And once we can educate them, we've accomplished two things. We've educated our next generation. At the same time, we've showed them that we win through education. And then we educated our adversaries, and they can go spend all that attention and money on something that's important. Swimming pool deaths, or ATF is alcohol. What is that? 200,000 deaths, 500,000 deaths. And then tobacco is 500,000 deaths. And then firearms with suicide.
Overdoses just cracked 100,000 for the first time in history last year. That's a really sad milestone.
I'm saying ATF.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
They take two giant vices and then stick them in there with explosives and then us to marginalize us. But you're right, the whole fentanyl thing. I've seen a couple of comparisons that just, when you kind of alluded to it when you were talking about the numbers earlier, but firearms are, in the grand scheme of things, nothing compared to health, and they're very little compared to accidents, and we're about the same as cars, depending on how you look at it. If you include suicides, we're the same as cars.
Yep.
Well,
yeah.
I don't want to keep you all night. I'd appreciate you jumping in on a Monday to have a conversation with us and to bounce some of the stuff kind of out of nowhere. You didn't have a script or any kind of pre-warning, so thanks for being flexible and adaptive. And thanks to everybody who showed up live to throw some questions out there. Do appreciate it. There's 149 or so people that sponsor what I do. They throw a couple of bucks at me each month. Some of them buy me a cup of coffee. Some of them buy a lunch, and that adds up. And I'm able to spend my time doing this instead of trying to get you to buy some new grip angle or some kind of red dot optic or whatever. You go do whatever you're going to do. We're going to keep talking about 2A. And where was I going with that? I think we're going to just wrap it up. I'm not going to put a lot of my exit stuff in here, but I did want to throw one question at you. I've been asking people what book they might recommend. So I'm going to start throwing another question out there since this is the Daily Gun Show. Do you have a gun show story?
So with the qualifier that I wasn't really into the gun community until 2019, and I went to my first real actual gun conference in fall, and then my first gun show in January of 2020. I will say that I didn't get it. So I was raised in a household full of cops and a family full of cops. And so the gun was always like a tool of the job. We hunted, and the rifle was the tool of taking down the animal. I didn't get gun culture at all, like at all. And I was one of those, 2A, but type of guys who nobody needs an AR-15. I owned one, but I was like, nobody really needs one. And then I went to SHOT after GRPC, and I got it. I really got it. Several conversations, but the experience overall left me with two impressions. One, these people are super, super, super nice and very, very smart, and they're super, super, super diverse, like in every definition of the word. So my gun show story is that I was educated without intending to be educated. I went there to educate because I was the mental health dude, and instead I got rocked. I got absolutely put on my heels with the level of intelligence and purpose and knowledge and diversity of the global gun community. It was very, very impressive. So, and the fact that I was welcomed in, ignorant as I was, I think speaks volumes of our people. I think that's really cool. I'll throw another book though. So I mentioned Christian Conti's book, but I'll leave with another book that's not psychotherapy based. It's really inspiring. It's a book called Factfulness by a guy named Hans Rosling, Rosling, Hans is his name. Hans Rosling, Factfulness. Pick that up, read it. It's very good. It's an easy read, and it gives hope because the world is not as bad as we think it is, and he has data to prove it.
Well, that sounds cool. Trying to talk and type at the same time, but I think I found it. I'll put it in here when it's over. So it sounds cool though that so you're basically saying SHOT Show is the gun show story. So it's cool then that doing your path or whatever and just the decisions you made got you to that point. And I've known from listening to your conversations in other people's podcasts and just being in other conversations that once you had that epiphany or that realization, or at the same time you were having that, I don't know exactly the timeline, but you were able to take that enthusiasm over to the medical side of it. So as much as Walk the Talk America is here for the firearms community, and we're talking about the aspects of Walk the Talk America that interact or interface with the firearms community, the efforts that you've made and you've expressed, that accomplished on the other side, getting physicians to realize that the firearm owners, for example, have apprehension about going in to seek medical health or help because we don't know, period, like we don't know. There's unknowns there. And once you've illuminated them, they've made efforts, or you've helped them make efforts to become aware of that. You've got we didn't really talk about it tonight, but you've done because I didn't really let you, but you've made a course that allows physicians to become aware if they want to of, I forget the words, but basically gun culture effectively.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So
yeah,
then
exactly that. And those are available on our website. So if you happen to be, curiously listening in the closet like I was, if you're in the medical or mental health community and you want to learn more about gun culture, probably if you're listening to this, you do know about gun culture. But if you want to learn about how to apply that knowledge in your clinical practice, reach out to me. I'd be happy to guide you through my own journey and how to do it tactfully so that you're not, risking your career if your boss perhaps doesn't appreciate it as much as you or I do, or if you're in a university setting where it's, super ultra woke and they don't like guns or whatever, how you can maybe broach the subject like David Umani has in his coursework. That's feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to help mentor people through that process because it can be a little spooky.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's all I'm saying. It's cool that you were there to be able to be there, because without you there, then we'd still have that rift, that divide, and that no one would know what they didn't know, and we'd still be dealing with that.
I call it a self-imposed chasm. Both sides are digging the chasm between us, and nobody wants to walk across the bridge. And I see Walk the Talk America as being that like Indiana Jones Last Crusade bridge where you like step off and it's like, oh, there it is. That's what we're trying to do is bridge the gap truly, so that we can all talk. And it takes a little bit of courage to take that first step from both sides. I don't like the both sides thing, but there are two sides, and one side is way more eager to engage than the other, I will say at this point. So hopefully the medical / mental side comes to the table a little quicker and a little more in volume.
Right on. Well, thanks again. And thanks again, everybody, for showing up. If you're listening in the future as podcast or as one of the videos out there, then leave us some feedback. And all the links to the Walk Talk America, to the your Substack, to your Twitter, and well, I don't think I have a link to the podcast, but I'll put a link to the podcast and a couple of the books that we mentioned tonight. It's
wherever podcasts are found. It's just called Guns and Mental Health. We're the only one out there. Thanks for having me.
But I guess I should put an ending on here just so it sounds like something.
Yeah. Drop in some music.
Tonight's episode, photo finish.
Thank you for supporting our projects. If you'd like to buy us a cup of coffee, check out our Patreon channel.
The guys and gals at gunwebsites.com encourage you to take a CCW class every year, practice at least once a month, and carry every day. Thank you for watching gunwebsites.com.
Here we go.